May 1945, Bavaria. The war was over, but the reckoning had not yet come. The smoke over Europe had not yet cleared. Half of Berlin lay in ruins. The historic center of Dresden had turned to ash. Millions of people had poured into the roads searching for their countries, their homes, their families. Germany was not defeated, it was spent. This distinction mattered. In the face of defeat, people can find resistance. In the face of exhaustion, they can only wait. When George Smith Patton entered these lands at the head of the Third Army, he had just completed one of the fastest land advances in world history. The march that began on the shores of Normandy in August 1944 had crossed France, swept through Belgium, fought in freezing cold at the Battle of the Bulge, and finally crossed the Rhine to plunge into the heart of Germany. 8 months, thousands of kilometers, tens of thousands of soldiers. Now, a headquarters was needed. When Patton saw the castle in Bavaria, the choice was clear. The structure rising atop the hill, the lines of sight extending in every direction, the spacious rooms and solid walls. A building an architect might have designed for military purposes. Patton walked through it, approved it, and moved in. Within days, maps were hung on the walls, radio equipment was set up, and American soldiers began walking those centuries-old corridors. Those corridors now knew different footsteps. The stones of the building had belonged to the same family since the mid-1500s. It had been built during the height of the Holy Roman Empire. The thick walls had been constructed for genuine defensive purposes. Then times changed, the nature of wars changed, but the castle remained the same. Corner towers, windows facing the village a 30-minute walk away, the main entrance gate carved with the family crest, the great hall lined with portraits each bearing the name of a chosen ancestor. A structure that had proclaimed the continuity of a single family across centuries. 3 weeks later, a staff officer knocked on Patton's door. "General, there is a German civilian outside. He says the castle belongs to him." Patton paused, then he continued, "Let's meet him." When the man entered, Patton read him in a single glance. A man in his 50s, wearing a suit that had survived the war years but had not lost its precision. Tie straight, shoes polished, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, a posture trained from birth. A century-old habit, his body language said, "I am here and I have the right to be here." The Baron entered, and he asked Patton for his castle back. He did not request it, he demanded it. Before we get into how this encounter unfolded, if you want to learn more untold stories from World War II, click the subscribe button and support us for free. He spoke of 400 years of property rights, of how it had been in the same family's hands since 1543, of how the crest above the main entrance was theirs, of how his family had governed, protected, and shaped this region, of how the Americans were guests, not occupiers, of how they could find another building. Bavaria had plenty of options, of how he was confident they would understand. Patton listened without saying a word, then he walked to the window. Below, in the shadow of the castle, a small village was visible. The descendants of people who had worked the Baron family's lands for generations. No one in that village had a castle, no one had a facade, no one had stone walls. There were only muddy streets and low rooftops. "You say your family has served this region." "Yes, General, for 400 years. What exactly did they do?" The Baron faltered slightly. "They maintained order, they governed the people, they kept the region stable." "They did this from the castle?" "Of course. This was our center." Patton turned. "The people living in the village below, the ones whose ancestors tilled your family's fields, where did they live?" The Baron did not answer. Patton had not expected an answer. He had not asked the question for the Baron to answer it. He knew the number of Germans killed in World War II. Between 5 and 6 million soldiers from the German armed forces had lost their lives. Civilian casualties were at least 2 million more, but the calculation in Patton's mind was different. 6 million Jews. Hundreds of thousands of Roma, disabled people, political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses. Systematically, with bureaucratic coldness, they had been murdered by railways and extermination camps. Patton himself had liberated some of these camps. In April 1945, he had personally visited Ohrdruf. What he saw had made him weep. Patton had not wept in even the hardest battles of the war. And through all of this, what had Germany's aristocracy done? Some had actively supported the regime. Some had profited economically. The vast majority had stayed silent. They had sat in their castles, harvested their crops, watered their orange groves, eaten their family dinners, and stayed silent. They had not thought that silence was also a choice, or that they might be held accountable for that choice. "Your family has lived in this castle for 400 years, said Patton. "Is that correct?" "That is correct." "What did they do to deserve it?" General, I don't understand this question. There is no question of deserving. This is our— I'll tell you why I'm asking, said Patton. Because in my army, there are men who won me this war. A farmer's son from Kansas, the son of a factory worker from Detroit, the grandson of a miner from the Appalachian Mountains. These men were not born in a castle. They did not eat with silver spoons. They did not go to private schools. Doors were not opened for them by their father's name. But they stormed the beaches at Normandy under machine gun fire. They fought frozen stiff at Bastogne in -30 degrees, without even winter clothing. They gave their lives in Hurtgen Forest among the trees against an invisible enemy. For none of them did I ask for a family tree. No one had portraits of ancestors on their walls. They only had what they did. Were these men noble? Their names were not on any list of nobility. But let me tell you this. I saw what happened on those beaches, in those forests, in those snow-covered fields. I understood where true nobility lives. The Baron opened his mouth. I'm not listening to you, said Patton. Germany started a war. You lost this war. And this castle is now American military property. Then he called for his aid. Convert this building into a stable. At maximum capacity. Notify the engineering unit. Start tomorrow. The Baron went pale. Stable, we have horses. They need shelter. The floor is solid. The ventilation is good. The Great Hall can hold 30 horses. The dining room 20 more. I'd say 80 horses in total. This is an atrocity. This building holds historical value for centuries. An atrocity, said Patton, was what happened in the camps across Europe. This is merely a decision about usage. The Baron's eyes drifted to the family portrait on the wall. Those stern faces that had gazed out for centuries, his father, his grandfather, his grandfather's father. The eyes of each one said the same thing. This is ours. This has always been ours. This will always be ours. Patton did not even look at those portraits. Within a week, the engineers got to work. Wooden partitions were built across the Great Hall. Feeding troughs were mounted in the formal dining room. The library was turned into a storage room. Hay was spread into the corners where century-old oak tables had stood. Those walls, which for a generation had heard family gossip, war stories, and evenings of music, now heard the neighing of horses. Patton had the Baron's family informed of every development. He sent photographs. He forwarded reports. He relayed capacity updates. The message was clear. The power of the title was finished. The other noble families in Bavaria heard the news. Some wrote letters of complaint. They petitioned occupation authorities. They sent written objections, cited the Geneva Convention, spoke of property law. Patton's response to each was the same. You started the war. You upheld the system. The privilege is over. Be grateful you're alive. The complaints ceased. Historians debated this decision for years. Some argued that the Baron's personal culpability was debatable, that the castle had architectural value, that cultural heritage should be kept apart from war. They suggested Patton had acted out of symbolic vengeance, that this was a personal rather than a legal decision. Others assessed it differently. The European aristocracy was not merely a cultural institution. It was the backbone of the economic, political, and social structure. The great German industrial families, landowners, and titled business people had been among the financiers of the Nazi regime. Some had provided labor for the camps. Those who stayed silent had, through that silence, made space for the system. Silence is also a choice. After the Americans withdrew, the castle was used for various purposes. In the following decades, it was restored and turned into a museum. The stable layout was removed, the walls were renovated, and visitors began to walk those corridors. But the Baron family's ownership was never restored. The newly established West German government rejected the land and property claims of dozens of aristocratic families. Legal proceedings dragged on for decades. The old world closed, and as it closed, it left behind a deep silence. In the new world, it was action that counted, not title, choice, not blood. What was done, not where one was born. This seemed like a simple idea, but until that day it had not been put into practice across most of Europe. No manifesto, no revolutionary proclamation. It was that hall, where the horses were stabled, that said it. Patton made his point not with a speech, but with a stable. Now I want to ask you something. If you had been in that room in 1945 and the decision had been yours, could you have done the same? The Baron may not have been personally guilty, but the system he represented was. Who was to decide where complicity began and where it ended? The answers to these questions are not easy. If they were, they would not have been debated for years. Write what you think in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. And we continue to tell these unknown faces of World War II, those turning point moments where the old world collided with the new. Subscribe and don't miss the next story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Stay tuned.